Support for this podcast is brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. We take a closer look at our human experiences and use stories to explore culture, history, and contemporary issues. You can find us on thinkwhy.org.
My mom, after my parents' divorce when I was 2, to make a little extra money afterwards, she had to take on this weekend job cleaning apartments. And to make a long story short, her and the multimillionaire fell in love.
Hello, I'm Emmy DeGrappa. This is What's Your Why? Each week we bring you stories asking our guests the question why. We learn about their passion, why they do what they do, why should we care, and what can we learn? What better place to explore the human landscape than from the state known for its incredible landscapes, Wyoming? And what better organization than Wyoming Humanities? Serving our state for over 45 years, we share stories, ideas, and wisdom about the human experience. Welcome to What's Your Why? Tara Clancy is a native New Yorker and author. She is a frequent host of the Moth Mainstage live shows, a Moth GrandSLAM winner, and has told stories on the Moth Radio Hour, NPR's Snap Judgment, The Story Collider, and Risk. Welcome, Tara.
Hi, how are ya?
It's so good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's my first time in Wyoming ever.
Ever?
I've never been to Wyoming.
And we cannot tell by your voice that you are from New York, okay?
I bet.
You're not a dead giveaway. Tell us how storytelling became your life work.
All right. So I am born and raised in the local bar business in New York. And so when people tend to ask me that question, you're pretty good at telling stories, Tara. How'd that happen? I say, I'm born in a bar. It's like being born 7 foot tall and being able to play a little basketball. In bars, stories are everything, and it's high art. Being able to hold court. I watched my dad do it, and I was enamored. And from as young as I can remember, that was my favorite thing to do. Like other kids wanted to play video games, I wanted to listen to people tell stories. The old guys in the bar. I could sit for hours. So I guess I started telling my own stories. And then, in the last 20 years that the Moth's been around and there's been a renaissance of storytelling, I was psyched and signed right up.
Why do you think there has been a renaissance of storytelling? That's interesting to me.
Yeah, it is to me too. I think people want to connect to one another. Obviously we talk a lot about the social media and the new digital world, and we don't have as much connection. And there's something about just hearing a true personal story from another person, whether you're hearing it on the podcast or the radio or coming to a live show, you're connecting to people in a way that I think we're not doing a lot of lately, So I think, as social media went up on the rise, so did storytelling. People were like, well, wait a minute. I still do want to hear from people who aren't exactly like me, who aren't in my circle, and the Moth really does a lot to bring underrepresented voices, give them a platform. And I think people are excited to hear about somebody who's different from them, somebody whose story may not pop up on their Facebook feed. We want to connect a little more in person or hear personal stories because there's a little separation now with, so much stuff being online. At the same time, we're a little more comfortable with putting our personal lives out there for a lot of people to see. So it was a perfect storm for there to be a rise of storytelling,
And how did you get connected with the Moth?
I showed up at a slam. I put my name in the hat. And I got picked, and that's it. And then from there, I told a few slam stories, and then I told a GrandSLAM story, and then I went to the main stage and I told a story and started doing that around the country. And then in the last couple of years, I became a host.
Do you help people tell their story? Do you guide them through that process? Is there a process, or
What do you think about that?
Yes. So there is a process. I'm not the person for that. So the Moth has just some of the most amazing directors who work with folks when they come to the main stage. People at the slam level can be just anybody. We don't know anything about them and they don't know anything about us. Any person can show up and put their name in the hat without having, any prior experience. But when people come to the main stage, the Moth does have a team of directors that sort of helps them to figure it out. And that's because they're going to be in front of sometimes thousands of people.
But if people just show up and their number or their name gets chosen, however it happens, how do they become so popular that they get to enter into the Story Slam?
Well, so just to enter into a regular story slam, you can be anyone. And I mean, people know to come a little prepared, right? You should have a story that's 5 minutes. It should be about 5 minutes. It's going to be off the cuff, but you want to think it through a little bit. And then you want to be on theme. That's another thing. So people come a little prepared. And then if you win a story slam, then you get to go to the Grand Slam. And so then you're going to, compete against the last, 10 winners of the regular slam. That's how that slam thing is a little interesting, but that's how that works.
Okay.
So you can just be anybody at that first stage. At that first stage, anybody can show up. To get to a Grand Slam, though, you have to have won one of our regular story slams.
What's the basis that they choose you on?
Oh, like how do you win?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like a gladiator. No, it's and again, this is meant to be a bit of fun. It was really meant to be a bit of fun. But audience teams are chosen. People volunteer to be teams in the audience. And then they judge the story based on whether or not it was on time. Believe it or not, you have to come in within this 5 to 6 minutes. Whether or not it was on the theme, that's a big one. And so those are some of the criterion that they're using to, decide if it's a good story.
Tell me about your work as an author. Is this the first book you've written?
This is the first book I've written. It's a memoir, and a lot of the stories that I told in The Moth became, the stories in my book. So I write a lot. I write about my own life, and, one of the main reasons that I did that was I sort of realized that my voice was missing, right? Like the voice of working class native New York women was kind of not there. Right, like we're all familiar with like De Niro and Robert, and Scorsese, and all these sort of people that have voices from New York. They tend to be men, and I actually realized that the last book written by a native working class woman about New York that was notable was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is now 74 years old. And in that entire 74 years, no one had heard from us. It's like my mother's, more than my mother's lifetime. Nobody had heard from us. And so I started, telling stories about my life and then writing stories, and they got published. I had some essays published in the New York Times, and from there I was able to get myself a literary agent and a book deal.
What do you think is most unusual about your growing up in New York that made it interesting for you to tell a memoir?
All right. I guess the sensational part, and I have told this story on the Moth Radio Hour, is that my mom, after my parents' divorce when I was 2, to make a little extra money afterwards, she had to take on this weekend job cleaning apartments. And the first one that she ever ended up cleaning was this big duplex owned by this multimillionaire. And to make a long story short, her and the multimillionaire fell in love. And so for 22 years, my mom was with this man who was from the total other side of the tracks of us, but she really was proud of herself. She never wanted this knight in shining armor thing. And so she was like, I'm going to raise my daughter my way, and that's going to mean in Queens, and that's going to mean on my dime, but on the weekend, we will come to your very fabulous country house, or you can, we'll go for dinner. And so for 22 years, she had this kind of dual life, and so did I. So I kind of grew up like a regular Queens kid, with the exception of every other weekend, I was being flown out to the Hamptons or, at these fancy restaurants in Manhattan. And so that sensational part of my life was definitely kind of what the memoir sprung from. People were interested in what that was like, kind of having this weird dual life. But, that's not all of what it's all about for me. A lot of it is really just a nice portrait of a lot of the women in my life. And I have this really tough, funny Italian grandma, and it was funny because I thought the story was so New York. But when my book came out, people wrote me from all over the country. They were like, this was like my family. This was like, just salt of the earth people. We don't get to read these stories, and that was amazing.
And it says in reading about your book, it says that you are 5th generation Irish and Italian. Is that correct?
That is correct. My mom's maiden name is Carmela Riccobono, and as you know, my name is Tara Clancy. So I'm Irish. My dad was Irish. My mom's Italian.
And so, what does it mean to be 5th generation?
So on my mom's side, my mom is actually 1st generation, but it's on my dad's side that I'm 5th generation, that we go all the way back, and that's nice, it's great, but it also sort of means like my people, I feel like they got off a boat, looked around, were like, this is good enough for me, forever, we're never leaving, whereas like Wyoming people, right, you guys come from this stock. If you're native Wyoming, I can imagine it was like your great grandparents were like, we're gonna trek across the country, we're gonna keep going, it'll be beautiful. My people were like, we got off the boat, we're done. The end.
Well, that must have happened to a lot of Italians and Irish, because there's big communities in New York.
Yeah. I mean, now obviously, I make some jokes. It's a little bit about money too, right? They didn't exactly have the money. They had just enough money to like get here, and then they were like, "All right, we're here, we're done." They kissed the ground, and that was it. But yeah, so there's definitely big populations of Irish, Italian people in New York, and a lot of mixes, just like me. So I grew up with a lot of other people that are also half and half like that.
So do you have relatives in Italy and Ireland?
I do. I don't know them, but I have, it's so many generations back, but I guess I do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Tell me one of your favorite stories that you've heard. Or that you tell, actually.
One of my favorite stories that I tell?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, you're really putting me on the spot. I mean, the one that I just mentioned, that was probably my favorite story to tell, was the one, so, I had this dual life of going back and forth. But what was interesting was that because my mom never took any money from this guy, she really didn't. She was really like, I'm very proud of who I am. A lot of people in my life didn't know. And so, my story was kind of interesting that when I was a teenager, I had some, new friends, and I would have to tell them, I would have to say, like, you might find this hard to believe, but like, I know a rich guy, and they were like, wow, but I wanted them to be, invited to his house, and I didn't want them to be nervous or like shocked or feel weird. And so I'd be like, you can come with me to his country house. I just needed to warn you, it's a little different than Queens. And so my story, one of my favorite stories that I've told in Moth, is about two of my best friends, who are still my best friends. When we were like, teenagers, we went to his like amazing country house, which had, this beautiful pool and a croquet court, like a regulation English croquet court. And I brought these like, pretty tough kids from Queens out to this house. And my mom's boyfriend's name was Mark. And what made him an amazing guy, he was super generous, is that he, beyond just like offering us his home, he loved to have these really big conversations with me. They were conversations that my mom ended up joking around and calling the moon and stars talk, because we would sit around all night and she would say, like, what are you talking about? Like the moon and the stars, But he would ask me these big, like, existential questions, and we just would chat and started from when I was young. And so my story is about bringing these two friends of mine, these two tough friends, out to his country house and having these big existential conversations with him. And those conversations really changed our lives, They really did. They really made us feel, like there was more to us than we knew, that the world was bigger than we had imagined, that there was options, that we were intelligent, that we weren't just these kind of rough and tumble city kids who weren't going anywhere, and they changed my life, and I know they changed some of my friends' lives too. So
that's encouraging and exciting.
Yeah, thanks.
Good for you.
Thank
Good
you.
And good for him.
And good for him. He absolutely opened my mind. I really don't know if I would be where I am without him. Like you said, I'm a 5th generation native New Yorker. I'm a 3rd generation bartender, and I'm a 1st generation author. This was new territory in my family. I come from a lot of blue collar people. So to write a book, to think your voice is important, I think he sparked that in me, that my voice was important, that I was smart enough, that I deserved for people to hear what I had to say. And
that's great. It's been great talking to you.
You too.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening. I'm Emmy DeGrappa. This Think Why podcast is brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. We use the humanities as a lens to explore the human experience. You can find us online at thinkwhy.org.